The restaurant was loud enough that most people wouldn't notice a single person quietly crying at a corner table. Plates clattered and chairs scraped across the floor. Laughter echoed near the entrance while a birthday song started somewhere in the back. But at a small table near the window, Rowan Carter sat perfectly still. A half-full cup of coffee cooled in front of her. A bowl of soup rested beside it, untouched except for one small spoon mark near the edge. Rowan held a napkin against her mouth as if she were thinking. Anyone passing by might assume she was simply tired. But her eyes were red. She blinked quickly and wiped it beneath them before anyone could see. Her phone lay face up on the table. The screen stayed dark. Rowan glanced at it again anyway. Nothing. Around her, the restaurant buzzed with families finishing dinner. Parents helped their kids while a couple near the counter argued softly over the bill. The whole place felt warm and full, except Rowan's table. She reached for the menu even though she had already ordered. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. Across the room, 3 little girls sat in a booth beside the wall. They were halfway through a shared chocolate milkshake and a plate of fries. The oldest, Lily Hayes, had stopped eating. Her fork hovered above the plate while her eyes stayed fixed on Rowan. Next to her, Emma leaned sideways to follow Lily's gaze. "What are you looking at?" Emma asked quietly. Lily nodded toward the corner. Emma turned. At first she didn't understand what Lily meant. Then she saw Rowan quickly wiping her face with the napkin. Emma's eyebrows pulled together. Beside them, 5-year-old Sophie kicked her legs under the table while humming to herself. Emma leaned toward her. "Don't look obvious," she whispered. Sophie immediately turned around in her seat and stared directly at Rowan. "Why is that lady crying?" Sophie asked loudly. Their father, Daniel Hayes, looked up from his burger. "Inside Voices," he said gently. Sophie lowered her voice, but didn't lower her curiosity. "She's sad." Daniel followed their gaze across the restaurant. He noticed Rowan sitting alone, the napkin still pressed to her face. He gave a quiet nod and turned back to his daughters. "Sometimes people just have a long day," he said. Lily didn't answer. Her eyes remained on Rowan. Something about the woman's posture bothered her. Rowan kept straightening her shoulders whenever someone walked past, like she was trying to look normal again. Emma noticed it too. The waitress approached Rowan's table and asked something cheerful. Rowan smiled quickly. Too quickly. She nodded, said something polite, and the waitress walked away. As soon as she left, Rowan's smile disappeared. Emma leaned closer to Lily. "She's pretending," Emma murmured. Lily nodded slowly. At Rowan's table, the soup finally caught her attention again. She picked up the spoon and stirred it absent-mindedly. Steam curled into the air, but she didn't take another bite. Her eyes drifted back to the phone. Still nothing. Rowan pressed her lips together. Then it happened. Her fork slipped from her hand and fell against the tile floor with a soft clink. She bent quickly to pick it up. For a brief second, her shoulders shook. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that anyone paying attention would know she was trying not to cry again. Lily saw it clearly. She leaned closer to the table. "Dad," Lily said quietly. Daniel looked up. She didn't eat anything. Daniel glanced across the room again. The soup bowl still looked almost full. The coffee had barely moved. Rowan returned upright in her chair and set the fork back beside the bowl. She stared silently at the table. Then she reached for the napkin again. Emma's expression softened. "She looks lonely," she whispered. Daniel opened his mouth to answer. But Sophie had already slid out of the booth. Her shoes tapped lightly across the restaurant floor. "Hey," Sophie, Daniel said, reaching halfway out of the booth. But she was already halfway across the room. Lily sat up straighter. Emma covered her mouth, watching. Sophie walked confidently toward Rowan's table like she had already decided something important. Rowan didn't notice her at first. She was staring at her phone again. Then, a small hand appeared beside the soup bowl. Sophie placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Rowan lifted her eyes toward her. The little girl stood there, holding a blue crayon between her fingers. Rowan looked down at the paper. A child's drawing. 3 stick-figure girls holding hands with a tall, smiling woman under a big yellow sun. Sophie tilted her head slightly and studied Rowan's face. Her voice was soft. "Are you lonely too?" For the first time that night, someone had noticed she was trying not to cry. Rowan expected the little girl's father to rush over, apologize quickly, and pull her back to their table. Instead, the child stayed exactly where she was. Sophie stood beside Rowan's table with the quiet patience of someone waiting for an answer that mattered. The restaurant noise carried on around them, silverware tapping plates, chairs sliding, people laughing, but Rowan barely noticed any of it now. Her attention rested on the folded piece of paper sitting beside her soup bowl. She slowly picked it up. The paper opened with a soft crease. A child's drawing filled the plus page. A tall woman stood in the middle, smiling wide, holding hands with three smaller girls. A bright yellow sun hovered above them, and a crooked house leaned in the background. It was simple, but something about it made Rowan's chest tighten. She looked back up at Sophie. The little girl held a blue crayon like it was proof of something important. Rowan tried to speak, but her voice didn't come out right at first. "Did you draw this?" she asked quietly. Sophie nodded proudly. Then she leaned a little closer to Rowan, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "My teacher says sad people need friends." The words were soft, matter of fact. Rowan hesitated, clearly caught off guard by how direct the child was. Before she could respond, quick footsteps approached from behind. Daniel Hayes appeared beside the table, slightly out of breath and clearly embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly, reaching for Sophie's shoulder. "She tends to wander when she gets curious." Sophie looked up at him but didn't move. Daniel gave Rowan an apologetic smile. "I promise we're teaching her better manners." Rowan shook her head gently. "It's okay," she said. Her voice sounded calmer than she felt. Daniel guided Sophie back a step, but the movement had already caught the attention of the other two girls. Lily and Emma slid out of their booth and walked across the restaurant. They stopped a few feet away from Rowan's table, studying her with open curiosity. Rowan wasn't used to being observed this closely. Most people in public spaces looked away when they noticed someone crying. Children were different. They looked directly at the things adults tried to hide. Emma leaned slightly toward the table. "That's a nice drawing," she said, nodding at the paper. Rowan gave a small smile. "It really is." Sophie folded her arms proudly, clearly pleased with the compliment. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, unsure how to end the moment politely. "All right, girls," he said gently. "Let's give her some space." But Lily didn't move. Her eyes traveled across Rowan's table, the coffee, the soup, the empty chair across from her. Then she noticed something small. Rowan's spoon had barely touched the soup. Emma saw it too. "You didn't eat your dinner?" Emma said softly. Rowan glanced down at the bowl like she had just remembered it existed. "I guess I wasn't very hungry," she replied. The answer didn't seem to satisfy the girls. Children had a strange way of noticing things adults ignored. Sophie leaned forward again, peeking at Rowan's table. "Are you waiting for someone?" Rowan's fingers tightened slightly around the picture. The question hovered in the air for a moment. She gave a quiet shake of her head. "No." The girls exchanged a look. Something about Rowan's voice told them that answer carried more weight than it sounded. Rowan carefully folded Sophie's drawing and placed it beside her soup bowl. The small paper sat there like it belonged. Daniel watched the scene unfold, realizing his daughters had already decided something in their minds. They weren't leaving this woman alone tonight. He cleared his throat and gestured toward their booth. "Girls, come on." Emma hesitated. Then she asked Rowan something gently, almost like she was worried about the answer. "Where are your kids?" The question landed softly but firmly. Rowan froze. Her eyes lowered to the folded drawing again. For a brief second, the restaurant noise faded behind the sudden quiet around the table. Daniel immediately noticed the shift in Rowan's expression. He stepped forward quickly, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Okay," he said, guiding the girls back slightly. "That's enough questions." Emma looked confused. She hadn't meant to hurt anyone. Rowan forced a small smile, though her eyes had grown distant again. "It's all right," she said quietly. But Daniel could see it wasn't. A thought formed in his mind, simple and practical. Maybe the easiest way to end this awkward moment was to bring Rowan into it. He glanced back toward their booth where 3 half-finished desserts waited. Then he looked at Rowan again. "Well," he said carefully, "if you don't mind a little company, you're welcome to join us for dessert." Rowan stared at them in surprise. The offer caught her completely off guard. Across the table, Sophie's face lit up immediately. Emma looked hopeful. Lily simply watched Rowan with quiet patience. Rowan stayed quiet for a second. The invitation felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room she hadn't been inside for a very long time. She looked down at the folded drawing beside her bowl. Then she slowly stood up from her chair. Daniel gestured toward their booth, and the girls began walking back ahead of them. Rowan followed a few steps behind. As she approached the table, Lily leaned slightly toward her sisters. Her voice was soft enough that only they could hear. "She looks like someone who hasn't had dinner with a family in a long time." Rowan paused just before sitting down, suddenly realizing the empty chair waiting for her at their table. Rowan hadn't realized how long it had been since she sat at a dinner table where children were laughing. The Hayes family's booth felt warmer than the rest of the restaurant, not because of the lighting or the food, but because of the noise the three girls created as soon as Rowan approached. Daniel slid slightly to the side to make room. Rowan paused for half a second before sitting down. The seat across from Sophie felt strangely unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. She suddenly wasn't sure where to place her hands. Lily immediately leaned forward across the table, studying Rowan like she was, as trying to solve a quiet puzzle. Emma scooted her plate a little to the side so Rowan had space. Sophie simply beamed. "Now you can have dessert with us," she said proudly. The table held the remains of dinner: half-eaten fries, a melted milkshake glass, and two small dessert plates the girls had been slowly working through. Rowan looked around at the noisy table. Crumbs, laughter, and three girls talking over each other. Something about it made her chest feel tight again, but this time the feeling wasn't entirely painful. Emma rested her chin in her hands and looked at Rowan curiously. "What's your favorite dessert?" she asked. Rowan hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Her eyes moved to the plates as she thought for a moment. "I haven't thought about that in a while," she said quietly. Emma seemed to accept the answer without questioning it further. Daniel noticed the small smile that had appeared on Rowan's face. It was faint, but it was real. Emma pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack and placed it on the table. "I drew this today," she said. The paper showed a colorful picture of a playground with stick figure children running around. Sophie quickly grabbed another drawing from the pile. "And this one is mine," she added. Her picture was messier, but filled with bright crayon circles. Rowan studied each drawing carefully, nodding like they were important pieces of art. "They're both really good," she said. Sophie leaned forward excitedly and reached for her dessert plate. She slid it across the table toward Rowan. A slice of chocolate cake sat in the middle, slightly squished from earlier bites. The frosting had melted along one side. Sophie pushed the plate closer. "Sharing makes things better." Rowan studied the cake quietly. For a second she hesitated. Then she picked up the fork resting on the plate and took a small bite. Lily and Emma eyed her carefully. Sophie bounced slightly in her seat. "See," she said. Rowan laughed softly. The sound surprised even her. It had been a while since laughter came out so easily. But as quickly as the laugh appeared, something else followed. Her eyes filled again. She quickly turned her face slightly away, brushing beneath her eye before the girls could notice. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything. He simply took a slow sip from his drink and let the moment pass. The conversation moved again when Emma began explaining how their school had a small art fair coming up. Lily added details about a science project she was building. Rowan listened quietly, nodding as the girls talked over each other. Their energy filled the space around her. For a few minutes she simply stayed inside the moment. No phone, no empty chair, just voices. Then Lily noticed something in the way Rowan spoke. Rowan had casually mentioned cooking. "I used to cook big dinners," she said without thinking. Every night, the words slipped out naturally, but Lily's head tilted slightly. "Used to?" Lily asked. The question was simple, but Rowan's fork stopped halfway to the plate. The booth grew quiet for a moment. Rowan's gaze dropped to the table. Her fingers traced a small crumb near the edge of Sophie's plate. The girls waited. Daniel watched Rowan carefully, sensing the weight behind the single word. Rowan gave a small nod. "Yeah," she said softly. The conversation shifted again when Sophie suddenly spotted the time on Daniel's phone. "Dad, it's getting late," she said. Daniel glanced at the screen. She was right. He began gathering napkins and pushing empty plates toward the edge of the table. The girl slowly slid it out of the booth. Rowan stood as well. For a brief moment she remained beside the table, unsure what to do next. The evening had moved so quickly, she almost forgot she had original. Beat sitting alone. Emma looked up at her with hopeful eyes. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" she asked. The question hung gently in the air. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Lily waited quietly for Rowan's answer. Rowan's smile faded slightly. Rowan looked at the table again, noticing the empty dessert plates and scattered crayons. The warmth she hadn't expected to feel tonight. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I belong anywhere anymore." The girls exchanged worried glances, and Daniel suddenly realized this quiet woman might be carrying a story none of them understood yet. Sometimes the people who notice your pain the fastest are the ones who met you only minutes ago. The Hayes family stepped out of the restaurant into the cool evening air. The door closed behind them with a soft chime, and the warm noise from inside faded into the background. Outside, the street was calmer. Streetlights cast long yellow circles across the sidewalk. A light breeze moved through the trees along the parking lot. Rowan wrapped her arms around herself without thinking. The sudden quiet felt different after the crowded restaurant. Sophie skipped ahead a few steps, her shoes tapping against the pavement. Emma followed closely while Lily walked beside Rowan with quiet curiosity. Daniel stayed slightly behind them, watching the small group move toward the parking lot. For several seconds, none of them spoke. Then Emma slowed her steps and looked up at Rowan. Her expression held the same gentle concern she had shown at the table. "Why were you crying?" she asked. The question wasn't harsh. It wasn't even loud, but it landed with a weight Rowan hadn't expected. Rowan stopped walking. The girls paused too, waiting for her answer. A car passed slowly down the street, headlights sliding across the sidewalk before disappearing around the corner. Rowan stared at the pavee, Nat for a moment. Her finger slipped into the pocket of her jacket. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet honesty that surprised even her. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she said softly. Emma and Sophie exchanged a quick glance. Lily stepped a little closer. "Kids notice things," Lily said. Rowan gave a faint nod. The truth had been sitting inside her all evening. Now it felt impossible to hold it back. She reached into her wallet and pulled out a small photograph. The edges were slightly worn. Rowan held it carefully for a second before showing it to the girls. The photo showed a young boy standing on a playground. He looked about 8 years old. His hair stuck out slightly under a baseball cap, and his smile was wide and fearless. Sophie leaned forward first. Emma followed. Lily studied the picture quietly. "That's my son," Rowan said. Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers tightened around the corner of the photo. "He used to live with me." The girls looked up at her. "Used to." The word lingered in the air. Rowan took a slow breath. 2 years ago, things changed," she said carefully. "His father moved away after the divorce." The girls listened closely. Rowan continued, choosing each word slowly. "He took Ethan with him." The name hung quietly between them. The name hummed quietly between them. Rowan glanced down at the photograph again. "I haven't seen him since." The street felt very still. Even Sophie stopped moving. Emma's shoulders dropped slightly, like she was trying to understand something much bigger than her age. Lily's expression hardened in a way that didn't match her 9 years. "That's not fair," Lily said quietly. Rowan didn't answer right away. She simply nodded once. Daniel had been listening from a few steps behind. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes resting on the photograph Rowan still held. Something about the boy's face tugged at his memory. Daniel looked again. The name Rowan had just spoken replayed in his mind. Ethan. His attention sharpened slightly. The girls attended Maplewood Elementary. A quiet detail surfaced in Daniel's thoughts. About 2 years ago, the girls had mentioned a boy who suddenly disappeared from school. Daniel studied Rowan again. Her last name had been on the receipt earlier when she paid the bill. Carter. The thought formed slowly but clearly. Daniel stepped closer. "Rowan," he said carefully. She looked up at him. Daniel's tone carried a quiet seriousness now. "You said your son's name is Ethan." Rowan nodded. Daniel hesitated for a moment, choosing his words. "My daughters go to Maplewood Elementary," he said. Rowan blinked slightly, Lily and Emma looked between them, sensing the shift in the conversation. Daniel's mind moved through a series of small memories. School pickup conversations, stories the girls had told during dinner, a boy who helped Sophie during her first weeks at school. Daniel looked back at Rowan. "Your son," he asked slowly. What was his full name? Rowan didn't sense the growing tension yet. She answered naturally, "Ethan Carter." The name settled into the quiet night. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. Lily noticed the reaction immediately. "Dad," she said softly. Daniel didn't respond right away. His attention remained fixed on the photograph in Rowan's hand. He had heard that name before, not from a teacher, not from the school office, from his daughters. Daniel suddenly realized the boy in Rowan's photo might be the same child his daughters had once talked about. Daniel had expected the name to sound unfamiliar. Instead, it landed in his memory like something half-forgotten suddenly returning to the surface. Ethan Carter. The streetlight above them flickered softly, casting pale light over the small group standing near the parking lot. Rowan still held the photograph between her fingers. She hadn't noticed the way Daniel's expression had shifted, but the girls did. Lily watched her father closely. Emma stepped forward, peering again at the photo Rowan held out. The boy's wide smile looked even clearer under the streetlight now. Emma leaned closer, her eyes widened. "That's Ethan," she said suddenly. Rowan stared at them in surprise. The words reached her slowly, as if they had traveled a long distance. "What?" Rowan asked quietly. Emma pointed carefully at the picture. "That's Ethan Carter," she repeated. Sophie tilted her head and squinted at the photo. Then recognition lit up her face. "Oh," she said softly. The boy from school. Rowan stared at them confused. The girls exchanged quick looks, their thoughts moving faster than Rowan could follow. Lily nodded slowly, still studying the photo. "I remember him," Lily said. Her grip on the photograph grew firmer. "You knew my son?" Emma nodded quickly. "He used to sit near the playground fence," she said. Rowan's breath caught in her chest. The simple detail made something inside her chest twist. For 2 years, Ethan had existed only in photos and memories. Now strangers were describing the places he used to sit. Sophie shifted closer to Rowan. "He helped me once," she said. Rowan glanced toward her. Sophie pointed toward her own knee as if the moment had happened yesterday. "Some older kids were being mean," she explained. Ethan told them to stop. Daniel listened quietly as the girls continued remembering. Lily added another piece. "He helped Emma with her backpack one day," Lily said. "She dropped all her books." Emma nodded. He picked them up before the teacher even noticed. Rowan felt something inside her chest begin to move in a way she hadn't felt in years. Not pain, something warmer. For so long she had feared Ethan might forget her. Or worse, grow into someone she would never recognize again. But hearing the girls speak about him painted a different picture. Her son had still been kind, still brave, still the boy she remembered. Emma suddenly reached into her backpack. "Wait," she said. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper and opened it carefully. The drawing looked old, the edges wrinkled from being carried around. It showed a group of small stick figures near a playground. One of them stood slightly taller than the others. Above the drawing, written in messy letters, were the words "Ethan the Brave." Emma held it out proudly. "He helped Sophie that day," she said. Rowan looked at the drawing like it was something fragile. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. The childlike picture carried more meaning than any official record ever could. Someone had remembered her son, not as a name on paperwork, but as a good person. Rowan exhaled slowly. She stood there silently, holding both the photo and the drawing. The girls watched her quietly. Daniel studied the scene with growing certainty. He stepped forward again. "There's something else," he said. Rowan looked up at him. Daniel hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When Ethan left school," he said slowly, "the office mentioned a transfer." Rowan's heartbeat quickened. She had spent 2 years not knowing where Ethan had gone. No letters, no calls, no information. Now Daniel's words hung in the cool air between them. "I might remember where the transfer went," he continued. Rowan's hands trembled slightly. The photograph crinkled softly in her grip. Her voice barely held steady. "Are you serious?" she asked. Daniel nodded once. "I think I can find out." Rowan remained frozen. The idea felt almost too big to believe. 2 years of silence. 2 years of wondering. And suddenly, a door had opened in the middle of a restaurant parking lot. Emma and Sophie watched Rowan carefully. Lily glanced between her father and Rowan, realizing the conversation had taken a direction none of them expected. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen thoughtfully. The school contact list was still saved there. Rowan watched the small glow of the screen in his hands. Her entire body felt tense. Every possibility she had forced herself to stop imagining was suddenly rushing back. Daniel slowly unlocked his phone and began searching through the school contacts. For 2 years, Rowan had spoken her son's name mostly in silence. Now, standing under the soft glow of a parking lot streetlight, she was hearing it spoken by strangers who remembered him with warmth. Daniel held his phone in one hand, scrolling slowly through contacts and old messages connected to Maplewood Elementary. The screen lit his face while the girls waited around him. Rowan stood just a few feet away, still holding the worn photograph and Emma's drawing. The two papers overlapped in her hands, one from the past, one from someone who remembered it. Daniel paused on a name and tapped the screen. He stepped slightly aside as the call connected. The girls remained quietly attentive. Rowan could hear the faint ringing through the quiet night air. After a moment, Daniel spoke in a calm, polite tone, asking a few careful questions. His voice remained low, respectful. The conversation didn't last long. When he ended the call, Daniel returned to the group slowly. Rowan searched his face immediately. "Well?" she asked. Daniel slipped his phone back into his pocket. "The school confirmed something," he said. Rowan waited, barely breathing. When Ethan left Maplewood, his father requested a full transfer of records. Rowan's shoulders tensed slightly. Daniel continued. "They moved to another town about 40 minutes away." The words settled around her. 40 minutes. For 2 years, Rowan had imagined Ethan living across the country, maybe even in another state. But 40 minutes meant something very different. It meant the distance between them had never been as impossible as she had feared. Rowan studied the photograph again. Her fingers trembled slightly. The possibility felt fragile, like something that could disappear if she moved too quickly. Behind her, the girls began talking excitedly. Sophie bounced lightly on her feet. "I knew Ethan was nice," she said proudly. Emma nodded. "He always helped people," she added. Lily looked toward Rowan with a softer expression. He never ignored anyone who needed help. The simple memories eased something inside Rowan. For years she had worried about the boy Ethan might become without her. But hearing these small stories told her something important. He had grown into someone kind anyway. The thought made her eyes fill again. This time, the tears came quietly. They weren't the same tears she had hidden inside the restaurant. These felt different. Sophie noticed immediately. She stepped closer and slipped her small hand into Rowan's. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "You're not alone tonight," Sophie said. Rowan looked down at her, startled by the certainty in the child's voice. Daniel watched the moment unfold, then shifted the conversation gently. "There might be a way to help you reconnect," he said. Rowan looked up again. Daniel folded his arms thoughtfully. "A friend of mine works with family mediation cases," he explained. "Sometimes they help parents reopen communication when things have been cut off." Rowan listened carefully. The idea sounded almost unreal. For 2 years, every door had seemed closed. Now strangers were standing beside her, offering solutions she hadn't even known existed. Rowan glanced at the girls again. Their attention remained fixed on her, as if they had quietly decided she was part of their evening now. She felt the weight of the moment pressing gently against her thoughts. Finally, Rowan spoke. Her voice came out softer than before. "Why are you all being so kind to me?" The question lingered in the night air. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, Lily stepped forward slightly. Her tone carried the simple honesty only children use. "Because you needed it." Rowan looked at her. The words were so direct they almost made her laugh. No complicated explanation, no hesitation. Just kindness offered without conditions. Daniel's phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket. The sound broke the quiet moment. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A new message had appeared. His expression shifted as he read it. Rowan immediately noticed. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel looked up slowly. The girls leaned closer. Daniel turned the phone slightly, so Rowan could see the message. A short line of text from the school contact appeared on the screen. It contained a street name, a house number, and the town Ethan's family had moved to. Daniel met Rowan's eyes. He didn't need to say much. The information spoke for itself. Rowan stared at the address glowing on Daniel's phone, realizing it might lead directly to her son. Some doors carry the weight of years behind them. The next afternoon, Rowan sat quietly in the passenger seat of Daniel Hayes' car as it rolled slowly through a quiet suburban neighborhood. Neat rows of houses lined the street. Freshly cut lawns stretched toward sidewalks where children's bicycles rested against fences. The neighborhood looked peaceful in a way that almost made Rowan nervous. Daniel glanced at the small paper on his dashboard again. The address from the message matched the house numbers passing by the windshield. In the back seat, Lily, Emma, and Sophie sat unusually quiet for once. They understood this moment was different from the restaurant the night before. Rowan's hands rested in her lap holding the photograph of Ethan. She had folded and unfolded the picture so many times since morning that the edges had softened even more. Her eyes moved constantly out the window, down at the photo, back toward the road. Daniel slowed the car. "I think it's this one," he said gently. The car rolled to a stop beside a small blue house with white shutters. A basketball hoop stood near the garage. A small red scooter lay on its side, near the walkway. Rowan stared at the house. She stayed completely still. Her mind tried to imagine Ethan walking through that front door, running across that small yard, growing up here. Daniel turned off the engine but didn't rush her. "Take your time," he said. The girls leaned forward slightly from the back seat. Sophie pressed her nose lightly against the window. "Do you think he's inside?" she whispered. Rowan's throat tightened. She opened the car door slowly. The cool afternoon air brushed across her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Daniel and the girls followed a few steps behind her. Rowan walked toward the house carefully, as if each step needed permission. The short path to the porch suddenly felt much longer. By then, each time she reached the porch steps, her heart was beating so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She climbed the 2 wooden steps and stopped in front of the door. For a second, she simply stood there. The house looked ordinary. A welcome mat rested beneath her feet. Wind chimes hung near the corner of the porch, swaying gently. Rowan pulled the photograph from her pocket again. Ethan's smiling face stared back at her. Her hands trembled slightly. Behind her, the girls watched quietly from the sidewalk. Lily placed a steady hand on Emma's shoulder. Sophie leaned forward a little. "You can do it," Emma said softly. Rowan nodded faintly. She lifted her hand toward the door, but the moment stretched longer than she expected. Her knuckles hovered inches from the wood. The fear wasn't loud. It was quiet. The fear that the boy behind that door might not remember might not remember her, or worse, might not want to. Sophie suddenly stepped forward onto the first porch step. She looked up at Rowan with complete confidence. "You're a brave mom," she whispered. Rowan looked down at her. The words steadied something inside her chest. Rowan finally lifted her hand again. Her knuckles moved closer to the door, but before they could touch the wood, the door opened. Rowan froze. A boy stood in the doorway. He looked slightly taller than the boy in the photograph. His hair was a little longer, his shoulders slightly broader. But the eyes were the same. For a second, neither of them spoke. Rowan's fingers slowly lowered. The photograph slipped slightly in her grip. The boy stared at her. His expression moved through confusion, curiosity, and then sudden recognition. His eyes widened. "Mom," he said. The word left him carefully, as if he wasn't completely sure it was real. Rowan's breath caught in her chest. Every sound around them faded. The wind chimes, the distant cars, the quiet neighborhood. All that remained was the boy standing in front of her, her son, Ethan Carter. Rowan took a small step forward, but the movement paused when another shadow appeared behind him. A tall figure stepped into the doorway. Ethan's father. He stopped beside the boy, his expression tightening slightly. As he noticed Rowan standing on the porch, the air shifted instantly. Daniel and the girls watched from the sidewalk below. Rowan's heart pounded again as she looked from Ethan to the man standing behind him. Because the reunion she had imagined for 2 years now depended on what Ethan's father would say next. Rowan had come to the door bracing herself for another goodbye. Instead, The first thing she saw was Ethan's face breaking open with recognition. He didn't stay frozen for long. The moment his eyes locked on hers, he moved. Ethan rushed forward so quickly the screen door bounced lightly behind him. Rowan barely had time to breathe before his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. She stood completely still, almost afraid to trust what was happening. Then her arms closed around him. She held him like she had been trying to finish that motion for 2 years. Ethan buried his face against her shoulder. Rowan pressed one hand gently against the back of his head, her fingers shaking in his hair. The old photograph slipped from her other hand and landed softly on the porch floor. Neither of them noticed. The quiet neighborhood, the sidewalk, the parked car, the watching children. Everything seemed to fall away behind that one embrace. From the doorway, Ethan's father, Mason Carter, stood motionless. His expression was conflicted, but it wasn't cold. He looked at Rowan, then at Ethan, still holding on to her, and something in his face softened with reluctant honesty. Daniel remained near the sidewalk with the girls, giving the porch as much space as possible. Lily watched with calm relief. Ma smiled with wet eyes. Sophie bounced once on her toes, then pressed both hands over her mouth like she knew this was not a moment to interrupt. Rowan slowly pulled back just enough to look at Ethan's face. He had grown taller. His cheeks were leaner now, but the warmth in his eyes was the same. Ethan looked up at her like he was trying to make sure she was really there. "I missed you," he said quietly. Rowan swallowed hard. Her throat tightened too much for a long answer. She touched his cheek gently, then nodded. Mason stepped onto the porch. His voice came carefully, shaped by things he should have said a long time ago. "He's asked about you more times than I can count." Rowan turned toward him, still keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder. Mason looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work or sleep. It was the kind of tiredness that comes from defending a decision for too long. "At first," he said, "I told myself distance would make things easier. For everyone." He stopped there for a moment, glancing at Ethan. But it didn't. The porch stayed quiet. No one rushed him. Mason exhaled slowly and looked back at Rowan. "Time gave me too much room to think," he said, and Ethan never stopped asking. Rowan felt the words settle deep inside her. There was no grand apology, no long explanation. Just the plain truth standing in front of her. Mason opened the screen door wider. "You can come in," he said. The sentence was simple, but Rowan felt it like a door opening in more ways than one. Ethan immediately took her hand and guided her inside like he had been waiting to do that forever. The house carried the familiar mess of everyday life. A backpack sat near the stairs. A cereal bowl rested in the sink. A pair of sneakers had been kicked off near the couch. It was not the house Rowan had imagined in her worst moments. It was just a home where her son had been, living. That difference mattered. A quiet detail near the entry caught her attention. Taped to the wall beside the kitchen was a school photo of Ethan, and beneath it hung a drawing with a small handwritten label. "Mom." The letters looked older, slightly faded. Rowan stopped for half a second. Ethan noticed and looked down shyly. "I kept it," he said. Tears filled Rowan's eyes again, but this time they didn't feel like breaking. They felt like healing. A few minutes later, Ethan tugged her gently toward the front window. 2 boys and a girl were riding scooters past the house. Ethan waved excitedly through the glass, then opened the door and ran onto the porch again. Rowan followed him outside. He pointed toward the sidewalk with open pride, like he had something precious to show the world. Those were his new neighborhood friends, and beside the driveway, Daniel stood with Lily, Emma, and Sophie, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. The girls looked proud in a way children rarely hid. Rowan turned toward them, still holding Ethan close. Her eyes moved from Daniel to Lily, then Emma, then Sophie. The 3 girls who had seen her crying when everyone else had politely looked away. Her voice trembled. "You changed everything tonight." Sophie smiled immediately as if she had been waiting to say one final thing. "See," she said. "Sharing makes things better." The weeks that followed built something none of them had planned that Friday night. Rowan began reconnecting with Ethan step by step, visit by visit, meal by meal. Mason no longer stood in the way. Daniel helped Rowan speak with a family mediation contact he knew, and this time the process felt less like fighting and more like rebuilding. The Hayes family stayed close through all of it. Soon, One dinner turned into another, then another. On Sunday evenings, Rowan found herself back at a dinner table again, not in a corner, not alone and not pretending she was fine. There were always children laughing. Someone always spilled something. Sophie always offered part of her dessert whether anyone asked or not. And on one warm evening, as plates passed from hand to hand and Ethan laughed beside the Hayes girls, Rowan looked around the table and understood something she had nearly stopped believing. The same woman who once tried to hide her tears at dinner now sat surrounded by people who had chosen to stay. And for the first time in years, Rowan no longer wondered where she belonged.